Now let's take a look at troubleshooting a BSD Unix startup process. Now troubleshooting is an art as well as a science, and there are things you can do to troubleshoot a bad startup. And a bad startup might be defined as services that don't start properly, a computer that becomes locked up, hardware that's creating problems that's either newly installed or possibly a corrupt device driver or something. Whatever the case may be, there are things that can happen during startup that you may want to troubleshoot and look at. Now understand that troubleshooting can be an advanced and complex process, so we're probably only going to scratch the surface a little bit of troubleshooting, but we're going to give you a few tools you can use to look at some basic things. After all, this is just an essentials course, and as you become more versed and experienced in Unix, you'll learn more how to troubleshoot more complex scenarios. One thing we'll look at is the dmessage command. Now dmessage basically gives you all of the logs that start up, all the messages when a Unix system starts up, so you can look and see if there were any errors. Another thing you can do is look at the /var/log/messages. This will tell you in excruciating detail sometimes what happened on startup, such as the kernel drivers are loading, file systems are mounted, and so forth. You can also look at hardware and drivers. You can see what drivers are installed, possibly see which ones did not start properly, and look at which ones are giving you trouble. And then you either pull that piece of hardware out and restart to see if that is actually what it was, or look at the drivers for that piece of hardware. Another thing you can do is check startup daemons. Check your inetd.conf file, and if you need to, comment some things out that may be causing problems with startup, or look at your rc.conf file and see what's actually starting up and look there as well. You may have to play around with a few things and turn certain services on and off before you arrive at the correct service that may be causing a problem. Another thing you can do sometimes is reboot into single user mode, which is a NIT1, and that mode allows you to perform certain maintenance functions on the system without having to worry about multiple users being logged into the system and so forth, or the processes that go along with those multiple users. It's a very slimmed down version of Unix, and only certain daemons and so forth start. So it's kind of like safe mode in Windows. Not exactly like that, but that's kind of the closest thing you could come to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few of these things that we've talked about when troubleshooting startup. Okay, we're in our VMware BSD Unix box, and the first thing we'd like to look at probably is dmessage. Now dmessage, as I said, basically gives you all the startup messages, logs, and errors and so forth when the computer's starting. And it can be a little bit lengthy, so we probably want to pipe this into the less command. And we can see where the computer started up, and we can see the version number and so forth. Available memory, we can look at ACP hardware starting up on the system. And if we scroll through here, we can see various pieces of hardware starting up. The ATA, the serial ATA drives, PCI starting up, USB starting up, and so forth. So you can kind of get an idea of what hardware is starting up and what's located on different resources. And again, this can be a rather lengthy file, and you can see different pieces of hardware and different things, processes that are started to get the computer booted up. So you can get an idea if something didn't start that was supposed to, or something errored out, you might see something in there about that. So that might be a good place for you to start looking. And as you can see, again, it's a rather lengthy file as we're paging through it here. Finally, we reach the end here. So dmessage is a good place to start looking when you have a problem with startup. Another place to look as far as logs and messages go is the var log messages. Now, if we type in, let's clear this first. Let's type in less/var/logs/messages, and if we take a look at that, Unix is very picky about what you type in, so you have to make sure you type in the correct thing. Log versus logs. And again, this is a lot of different messages that are being pumped into /var log messages, and you'll see different things. A lot of them similar to where we saw the dmessage. This is a little bit more complex. This is akin to the event viewer in Windows. It's a lot like that. You can see where the system was shut down, restarted, and so forth. You can see where the kernel processes started, where hardware was loaded, drivers loaded, and so forth. So you'll see successful things here, and you may see some unsuccessful things that might show you where you need to start looking. You can see if there were any kernel dumps here and so forth, and where they're at, what the memory looked like at the time, again, what devices and drivers and things were loaded up. If you just kind of page through here at the various things, you'll see you can get an idea of what resources such as IRQs and so forth hardware is using, what it should be using. There's just so much information in here, and again, it takes a while, it takes a little bit of experience with Unix to really get into this and figure out what a lot of these log entries mean. So you're probably going to have to spend some time with this. And I would recommend that if you're troubleshooting a startup by yourself, it's probably going to be a difficult process. You're probably going to have to troubleshoot this with someone who knows what they're doing, who has a little bit of experience looking at these logs and knowing what they're going to see. So we've looked at var log messages. Some other things you might want to look at are file system information, such as what's in the FS tab file. And we can look at that and we can see what devices are supposed to be mounted and where they're supposed to mount at and what their mount options are. Now if you want to see what actually mounted, simply type in the mount command. And that'll show you that we mounted device 80/1A on root, loaded the devfs on /dev, and that tells you what actually loaded up. Now notice that the CD-ROM did not mount up. It is in the FS tab. We'd have to mount that manual if you wanted. So if you had trouble getting the CD-ROM, it might be because it hasn't mounted yet. Now so there's some other things you need to check as well. Check services, and we've showed you how to look at the services. We've looked at the rc.conf file and the inetd.conf. And what you want to look for is services that start up, services that could be giving you potential problems or are not configured properly in these files. So if you've recently changed either of those two files, the inetd.conf or the rc.conf, you really want to take a look at how those are set up and see if there's an error in those files. When all else has failed, you also may want to look at going into the maintenance mode or single user mode of Unix. And that's actually done by simply typing in the init command and going to init1. And if you go to init1, you're basically going to get a single user, only the root user is logged in, no other user can log in, and certain processes are stopped and started and so forth. So now you're basically in single user mode. Now another thing you can do, once you perform maintenance here, once you work in here, you don't have the problem of some processes that are started that shouldn't be started while you're working. And then after this, of course, you can choose to reboot the system. If you reboot the system, one thing that's interesting with BSD Unix, with FreeBSD in particular, is that once the system reboots, you get actually a pretty decent menu, and you'll get some things that you might not see or might not know how to get to otherwise. Let's go ahead and boot to FreeBSD. We're going to restart here. And as you can see, you'll get FreeBSD default. You can also troubleshoot by going to FreeBSD with the ACPI disabled. There's also a FreeBSD in safe mode, single user mode, and verbose logging. So you can use those options as well to help you troubleshoot startup. You can kind of see what's going on when the computer starts up and see if you can fix it. Now again, this is going to take some experience and a little time, so don't get too intimidated by it if you can't do it right now or right after taking this course. It's going to take a little bit of knowledge and experience to do this, and some help sometimes. So we've covered some basics on troubleshooting startup, and we've looked at various things such as dmessage and looking at the var log messages, looking at the file system files such as fstab, doing a mount on it and so forth, and we've looked at services as well. These are just a few key things you'll do when you troubleshoot a startup, but understand there are many more as well.